Jesus Christ was always thinking strategically as he acted tactically. The observers there, they were saying, stick with the status quo, don't risk it, you'll embarrass us, be quiet. But Jesus identified the center of gravity. And that center of gravity, as you see at the end, it says, and the people, they gave praise to God. So that's one person, that tactical healing led to a strategic change in the tenor of that whole population. So that's pretty powerful. The second point I would bring out of it is that Jesus, and then anybody like us who seek to be bridges of healing, work compassionately to restore wholeness to the whole person. Christ didn't just say, have faith, or may you be healed spiritually, but he healed his physical blindness. He dealt with the physical need, and then he dealt with the spiritual need, both the sight, the physical sight, and the spiritual sight. Now, in my mind, that sort of refers to the intersection of the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. And I think it's an interesting discussion these days, and no doubt you all have been thinking a lot about it. As I'm in mission work, I see it all the time. I see that there's a ditch on both sides of the road. You can have a wonderful humanitarian operation, and you can be certainly loving God and loving your neighbor in a lot of humanitarian outreach. But there's a ditch on that side of the road, and that if you go totally in that ditch, you sort of forget about the relevance of the gospel and the relevance of life transformation and the reality of eternity as well as the temporal. And so you want to stay out of that ditch. And yet on the other side, if you're so heavenly, or what do they say, so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good, then there's a ditch over there too. And if you're whipping the four laws on them, when in light of their human need, they simply can't have the attention, place the focus on that, then perhaps that's an extreme in the other direction. So the question for me as a ministry, and perhaps for you as ministers, is how do you stay in the middle of that road between those two intersections, those two ditches, the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, and how do you combine those in proper balance as you go through? And certainly it's different ways at different times, different target audiences, populations, and things. A third thing I would draw out of this is that I think Jesus Christ certainly, and Bridges overall, affirm the faith and the resources of the one who was healed. We have to be awful careful as we minister that we send people out holistically and not codependent upon us or upon some mechanism that we've put in place in their lives. We want these people that are healed to be dependent upon the living God and his mercies and gifts to them rather than dependent upon us. And so the healing becomes a blessing not only to them, but to others. I think of the passage in John 21 where Jesus Christ, it was a fishing story, and they're hauling the fish to shore, and a little verse in there says, and Christ had some fish on the fire. And so he had sort of prepared it himself, it sounded like. No doubt divine fish and everything laid out ready for their breakfast. But profoundly it says, when they bring the fish to shore, he says, come, let us have some of the fish which you have caught. Now, isn't that interesting? Perhaps he takes his divine fish off that fire and he says, bring some of the fish which you have caught, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, put those on the fire. We're going to choose to need you, choose to use you, which is what Jesus Christ does. He empowers people. And so we in ministry, as a third point out of this, we want to empower others rather than make them codependent upon us. Now, I think those are all critical points as I now dive into, military ministry, Campus Crusade for Christ. What is that all about? The value proposition, as many of you might appreciate, is that the military marketplace in the military of any nation is incredibly strategic. It is a moral change agent. It is a strategic influencer. It is an unreached people's group. It is a target population, I would offer, in the United States and what I'm seeing in militaries around the world, that is pregnant with revival. There are spiritual movements underway in the military of the U.S. Armed Forces and then military of other countries around the world that are just incredible. And I'll talk a bit about that. And why is that? Well, some of the premises I said earlier. Threat clears a man's head. Light shines best in darkness. The sons and daughters of uniform in the American Armed Forces recognize they are probably headed to harm's way. And they need an anchor for the soul. And so it is that we in Campus Crusade Military Ministry seek to give them an anchor for the soul. Our vision is to transform the nations of the world through the militaries of the world. Now, we don't transform a nation by ourselves, obviously, but this is a strategic marketplace ministry, if you will, the militaries of the world. If you get it right in the military, you can generally get it right in a nation. If it goes wrong, it goes horribly, horribly wrong. Witness Burundi, Eritrea, Sierra Leone, etc. And so we seek to transform nations through the militaries. And our approach is, you might say, twofold. We recognize an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Everything that we can build into that military person from the very beginning is money in the bank. It allows him to view life through a biblical, a scriptural grid that changes his whole resiliency, which is a psychological term that I'll allude back to in a moment when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. So the ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure, very, very important. We have 6 pillars in military ministry. We try to reach our recruits immediately. There are 450,000 recruits in the freshman class of this next year's armed forces. That's going through boot camp. We will touch about 200,000 of them this next year with our staff. We have staff at half of the nation's boot camps. This last year, we hope the numbers will be larger next year, but this last year, 15,000 plus came to saving faith of Jesus Christ in the boot camps. And then our staff has the privilege and the responsibility to help them become lifetime laborers in God's vineyard. Now that's pretty cool, because in the boot camps, they are mentally transformed, and they are physically transformed. They'll be able to do a lot more push-ups. But our desire is that they also be spiritually transformed for their lifetime. And it's such a point of vulnerability, it's such a transition point in their whole lives that it is a very teachable moment. And so we're finding that to be the case, and then that's awful exciting. Those leaders, those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines need leaders. And so we also have a complementary ministry on college campuses and at places like Texas A&M, at the military academies. We want leaders to lead like Jesus. We want leaders in the 21st century to be able to be servant leaders and to be able to take care of their people and lay down their lives for their people the way Jesus did. We have 80 college ROTC campus ministries right now. It's powerful to see. Because we're aligned with Campus Crusade, we're not starting at zero with any of these ventures, but we go into a college campus, and if there's already the Campus Crusade infrastructure there, then we simply empower them, they empower us, and we're rocking and rolling. I'll mention the same dynamic internationally in a moment. Our third pillar of ministry, if you will, is to stop the unraveling of the American military family. I wish I could say it differently. Divorce rates are up. 7,000 3 years ago, 7,500, 10,000 this year. Is it going to be 15,000, 20,000? It's almost exponential in the increase of divorces. The compounding effect of multiple deployments, particularly in the Army, the 15-month tour that they now are reducing to 12 months, has had a tremendous effect. The suicide rates have been increasing. In the Army this year, highest suicide rates ever. 2 chaplains committed suicide. 121 soldiers committed suicide this last year. That's loss of hope. I'll talk about hope in a minute. That's loss of hope. And then how many attempted? 2,100 attempted suicide. That's more than 5 soldiers a day attempting suicide. And so when we talk about the relevance of the gospel, the relevance of the Word of God, you can appreciate in this environment how people are so hungry, so thirsty, how we need ministers of the gospel in every form, church and parachurch out there, getting the Word of God to the military men and women that we serve. The fourth pillar is armed troops in harm's way with spiritual resources. Since 9/11, we've passed out 1.85 million rapid deployment kits, all packed by volunteers. It's a New Testament approved both by the Protestant and Catholic churches. It's a How to Know God Personally, and it's a daily bread specifically designed for the military. 1.85 million in cargo pockets. And you can appreciate, and DTS would certainly appreciate this, the Word of God is powerful and alive and sharper than a two-edged sword, seeking to pierce the asunder between soul and spirit. And we get reports from the battlefront that are just incredible about not only the Word of God being the bread of life, but the Word of God being the very thread of life that helps keep people together, helps them have the will to live while they're on the operating table, etc. The fifth pillar is the internet is a powerful force for good or for evil. We recognize that troops of today spend more time on the internet than they spend in a church or a chapel. And so how do we reach them through this new medium? We're trying to learn just the way everybody else is. We have evangelistic websites. We buy Google Words that drive people to those websites more with greater probability. And then we connect them with online counselors. Again, some amazing things. We saw over 10,000 this last year that made online decisions for Christ, went on and went through that process. Now,